Hey everyone, well here we are. It's happening, DF Direct Weekly number 151. A massively packed show this week. Huge amount of news topics to get through, so let's get straight to the introductions first of all. Hello there, John Linneman, with your intriguing, dynamic, animated background there.
Yeah, that's right. We have a special guest on set this week. It's over there, over my shoulder, is Mark Triforce Dudelson from My Life in Gaming, who's visiting here in Germany. So we're working on a special N64 adjacent project, and we're starting with game number 1, which is Super Mario 64. So throughout the show, you can check on Mark's progress by looking over my shoulder. Either shoulder, and Mario 64 is happening back there.
Wow, amazing. He's Tri-Ace actually on his birth certificate. Just
Triforce? It's not.
Yeah,
it's
Triforce.
not on his birth certificate, as far as I know.
Okay. Right. Okay. Alex Battaglia, hi.
I was just wondering about naming laws. Can you actually just name yourself Triforce?
Well,
Why not?
he does it with the TRY for CE.
Oh, I don't know. They did do that thing with Elon Musk's child. Maybe.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I don't know.
So technically, you're mispronouncing it, John.
Maybe. You know.
Just so we can hear. All right. Okay. Well, as I said, lots to get through, so let's get straight to it. First news topic of the week, and it's actually something that quote unquote dropped news-wise after we'd just finished filming the last direct, so not really news as such, but it's certainly intriguing nonetheless. Multiple reports from all manner of sources that Nintendo has actually delayed the successor to the Nintendo Switch, which we shall call Switch 2 just for convenience, until at least Q1 2025, which came out of nowhere and is a bit of a shock. And John, I'm going to go to you first for your reaction to this. Why do you think this has happened?
Well, I suspect, first of all, it's difficult to call it a delay or not, right? Because it hasn't been officially announced. Based on rumors that had been circulating, it could be considered a delay. But because it's not official, this could just
you
be...
can't delay something
right.
that doesn't even exist officially.
Precisely. But my take is that Nintendo... First of all, obviously, I think they're continuing to sell Switches, so why not continue to ride that out? Especially because they actually have a chance at being the highest selling game console of all time. Right now, they are approaching that point, and it might happen. So, but I think what's probably more realistically driving this is that things just aren't ready, I'd imagine. I think Nintendo understands more than ever that launching your new platform with absolutely like a killer app is so critical that I suspect that they want to make sure that when they do launch, they have that stuff ready. They need to have the software ready for day one, and they need to have that first year kind of covered, if you will. And I think they've been working to that. You can kind of tell with some of their big teams, aside from Zelda, they've been kind of cooking stuff for a while. Yeah. We don't know what that would mean. I don't think it would be the biggest app, given that it's not as popular, but I would love to see Metroid Prime 4 at launch.
Yeah.
But maybe they'll have a 3D Mario at least at or near launch, kind of like they did with the previous with Odyssey. That seems feasible. But I mean, fundamentally, it's just clearly more time was required to get the product to market, I think.
Interesting. Do you think the hardware is ready?
Oh,
here's the thing, right? We were at Gamescom. We spoke to people that were, well, let's say connected. And there was the sense, I mean, the thing that did come out that is now public knowledge is that the Matrix Awakens demo, which everyone was really excited about, it was running on quote unquote target hardware.
Indeed.
As opposed to a finished product. So maybe it is just the case that they need to have more time to get the hardware ready. But with that said, the T239 processor, which is almost certainly at the core of the machine now, it's been ready for like years.
Yeah, I think the hardware is quite ready. I think it really is just a lot of the software side of things needing to roll out. And yeah, it's also interesting because this is the first transition for consoles under this new Nintendo leadership. Right.
Right.
And I can imagine why they might be nervous to make this transition, because the Switch has been so successful, and Nintendo traditionally has, maybe not so much in the handheld space, but in the console space, they've struggled to make those transitions, especially in the more recent years. Right. I mean, they went from the hyper successful Wii to the Wii U, which is a bomb. The GameCube was arguably not a success. N64 even, which behind us there, really compared to Super NES, it was not a success.
Right.
So, that's all history now, but still, I can imagine they want to approach this cautiously and are probably very nervous about the launch. And beyond that, things like, Nintendo being a Japanese company, the yen is extremely weak right now. So I almost wonder, does that have any influence on it? Does that have, does that affect what they want to do? Who can say? But clearly they're still working towards launch. And if the initial rumors and things we had heard suggested it might show up as of this fall, right? That was the most recent stuff I'd kind of heard, which makes me think this would be like a 5 months delay. If you can consider it a delay at all, but like not a huge amount of time difference.
Yeah, I think there was a projection for the end of this year, or Q4 this year rather, simply because of the trajectory of Switch 1 sales kind of dropping off. But I think there is a decline, but there's no denying that Switch 1 is still like a highly potent force out there. So it's just a fantastic machine, possibly one of their greatest of all times, if you think about it. I'm just kind of curious as to whether you think, I mean, here's the thing, right? We are now aware that developers should have development kits, but I think what's quite remarkable, and it was a similar thing with Switch 1, is that we still don't actually know what the machine is.
Right.
We're kind of surmising that Switch 2 is going to sort of follow on from Switch 1 and, basically offer a power and capabilities upgrade, but we don't really know what that little bit of what quote unquote Miyamoto magic is that sets it apart from the usual what we know about gaming. There's always some sort of mini twist in there, or hyper twist even. So yeah, curious to see what's going to be happening there. Alex, do you have any thoughts about this?
No, I thought we also haven't seen like a mainline Mario Kart in a while, right? Is that another thing?
A very long while.
I mean, the
Switch,
last one was
Switch game
the
is
Switch.
The Wii U.
Well, there was the Wii U game which got ported to Switch, and then they've done DLC packs for it. Which is my prediction is Switch 2 launch, Mario Kart 8 Super Deluxe, all DLC packs plus new DLC packs announced.
Plus even more
DLC.
I don't know. It's maybe levels. Isn't it just like different tracks?
That's not my actual prediction, but.
Mario Kart would be interesting, and I think that's a big system seller for sure. Mario Kart is. Yeah, no, I don't really have much to say about this here. I'd be curious. I'm still very curious about what the twist is. I don't know if Switch 2 just being more powerful is a very interesting sell versus Switch 1. I think Nintendo likes to do things differently with each generation. So I would be curious what the little twist is. I still hope it has the exact same form factor of at least being able to be a home console and being portable, which I don't think they're going to drop.
No way,
so.
They're not going to drop that.
I don't really have much to say here.
It's a bit of a definitive statement, really, to do a home console that is also a handheld. I mean, it's not so much a gimmick as opposed to a massive change in overall strategy for the entire company.
Yeah, sure.
We've talked on the Direct before that you can't go back from that. You can't go back to separating out those two devices anymore. In which case, what is the leeway for something that's actually fresh and original? It can't be that much of a revolution in terms of the actual function of the machine, right? So, yeah, I think there's still question marks about the form factor of the machine, bearing in mind the rumours of the 8-inch 1080p LCD, which basically makes it a more chunkier device compared to the standard Switch.
Remember those rumors about the double screens, though? I still say they could pack in a controller that has its own screen in it that you use, so that you always have access to a touchscreen.
Sounds suspiciously Wii U like though, John.
Yeah, but
we don't want that.
You couldn't take the Wii U out on the road, could you? And look, people love things like that. The PlayStation Portal is selling despite being worse than the Wii U.
This is true. This is so true. Is it really selling?
It is selling.
I have no idea.
Well, you can't buy them.
There are ardent defenders of the Portal. They're like, it's really good, dude. It's so good. I use it all the time. Like,
oh my
it's
god,
objectively not good, but I'm happy that you enjoy it. And I feel elitist when I say that, but it's just objective fact, right? Like, it has issues.
I don't know. I feel like the price is for what you're getting is just.
We'll talk about the Portal later for a specific reason.
Yeah, there has been some what you might call positive developments with PlayStation Portal. We'll talk about that later. Yeah,
not from Sony though.
No,
I mean, no.
I mean, Switch 2. I mean, if it is basically a software issue that they need more games to be ready, then I'm on board with this delay that isn't a delay. And I think that's the biggest challenge, right? If you go back and look at basically the life cycle of the Nintendo Switch, there's just no doubt whatsoever that one of the reasons why it was so successful is that the killer games just kept on coming, right? And one of the reasons those games kept on coming is because they had an entire generation's worth of prior first-party software that didn't sell because the Wii U didn't sell, and they could just bring it across to the Switch. And, those amazing games kept on coming. And that's a little trick that they can't really do twice, right? They've run out of they've run out of Wii U games to bring across to Switch.
No, they haven't. Rich. Really
they got Zombie U, right?
No, that's
Ubisoft. There's a few.
They got the Xenoblade Chronicles X or Cross, whatever you want to call it. They never brought that over. But there's not much more than that. That's not a system seller.
But obviously, I think obviously there's got to be a strategy with regards to software availability and to keep the supply of new software coming. I mean, you were talking about launching with a killer app. That's great, but you've got to keep the momentum going in order to secure those further sales. Yeah. And I honestly think third party has a huge part to play in that. Actually, thinking about it, while Nintendo can't really bring across anything from anything more from Wii U, certainly the third parties out there have got like a whole generation's worth of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One games that could suddenly become viable for handheld play.
Rise, Son of Rome on the go.
Yeah, I mean, Elden Ring, just as off the top of my head, would be like monstrous on a Switch 2, right?
Oh my god!
I could see Rockstar finally doing GTA 5 because they just did Red Dead Redemption, right? Now they get the next gen. Like, here's GTA 5 again. Enjoy.
Yeah, honestly, I was expecting them to do GTA on the standard Switch because they seem to be laying the groundwork with the likes of LA Noire and whatnot, but somehow it never came to pass. Anything more to say about this quote-unquote delay? I mean, it is a disappointment, I think, because we're all hyped up. We really want to see what they're doing, and we would love to see new hardware from Nintendo. Love to see a new generation of games from Nintendo, but, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer.
I mean, we did get a decent Nintendo partner direct this week. There was some Nintendo news, so we'll
talk about that in a moment, yeah. And, Microsoft being one of those partners.
Yeah, maybe that should move us on to the next topic.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the next topic then. Okay, so this week there was a new Nintendo Direct concentrating on the efforts of third-party developers. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, we actually saw that Microsoft have a couple of games coming to Nintendo Switch. Pentiment and what was the other one? Grounded. That's right, isn't it, John?
Yeah, Grounded. Mm-hmm. And my expectations were grounded after seeing it visually speaking, because no, I mean
it's UE4.
It does.
It's going to have a lot of trouble on Switch,
and it seems like it's going to have a lot of trouble on Switch, indeed. So yeah, this is these are the first round of announcements, and there was actually more after this, but these games were announced for Switch, Grounded and Pentiment, and that's kind of what we had heard with the rumors, and it turned out to be true. And it kind of makes the timing around all this stuff make more sense as well, like why Microsoft needed to get this out, given how secretive Nintendo Directs tend to be. It's like they wanted to get that stuff in the Direct, and they felt they had to address the audience, I guess, before that, given all the noise happening, right? I mean, imagine if all this stuff had dropped without any of this buildup, how much more of I think the Xbox community would react even stronger if it just came out of nowhere.
Really?
Do they care about Switch? Do they care about Switch?
Well, no, but what was
PlayStation envy, really?
The problem is that after this thing, they've officially announced Hi-Fi Rush and Sea of Thieves coming to PS5. So that's when it would have blown up. But yeah, the Switch stuff, maybe not that much. But yeah, that was announced for that. Pentiment, it seems like a really good fit for the Switch, I think, actually.
Absolutely.
More so than Grounded, which honestly I thought looked pretty much as you'd expect, but not great. But
Yeah.
so yeah, this was basically Microsoft's first. Though I guess technically, when you think about it, they've done. It's not really their game, I guess, kind of. But the Ori games did come to Switch, as we know, and that also had the Microsoft branding and everything in there.
Well, Hellblade, of course.
Hellblade,
that
of
also
course,
happened.
but that I think wasn't Hellblade developed and released before they acquired Ninja Theory, even, so it's kind of feels like it's outside their purview.
Yeah, possibly. We'd need to check the timelines on that for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's not as if, when Ori appeared on Switch that there was any kind of outcry. I guess there is that kind of...
Cuphead as well, right? Which Cuphead, when it launched, was a big Xbox exclusive, and then it also came to other platforms.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's even on the Tesla Model 3.
Sure.
The arcade section. It's a very good port, actually, as you'd expect. Yeah, but I guess the controversy would have sort of really taken to the next level if, after that Nintendo Direct, the announcement of Hi-Fi Rush appearing on PlayStation 5 along with Sea of Thieves, that probably would have caused a lot of issues. But obviously we kind of all knew it was coming now.
Yeah.
I'm now looking back at it with sort of hindsight, and it's not as if this is really that much of a big deal either. I still think that, if you've got that amount of time between its launch on Xbox and then its arrival on PlayStation 5, it becomes much less of an issue. It's sort of a non-issue. So I'm starting to see how the strategy is working now from Microsoft's perspective, which is to say, start with a drip feed of games, see what the reaction is. But I think the thing that sort of surprised me is that we're getting this happening all at once. And bearing in mind the timelines of game development, the concept that Microsoft is going to sort of sit back and wait and see what happens with these games before putting more out doesn't seem plausible. The more games will be in development now, and they'll be coming in due course this year, I'd imagine.
Towards the end of the year, you'd imagine.
You'd imagine. So I do think this is, the beginning of a shift to a much more aggressive multi-platform strategy. But at the same time, if it's handled correctly with the correct time delays for specific titles and the choice of titles, of course, I don't think it's going to be as much of an issue. I think the consternation surrounding all of this basically comes down to what's happening with their sort of heavy hitters. And I do think in due course, there's very good arguments to have the likes of Halo and Forza on competing platforms, right?
I'm actually skeptical that would happen. I mean, maybe long term, but I feel like the stuff that was always associated with Xbox would be less likely to appear during these early months. I feel like this is more likely we're going to see experimentation.
The early months, sure.
Yeah. I mean, maybe years down the road. It's hard to say, but I feel like...
Well, there is a sort of statute of limitations, right? I think, Alex, you tweeted this week that, having the Master Chief Collection on Switch is a really good idea.
Yeah, also I said, and I think this is going to happen because they recently did some update work for Killer Instinct, where they made it like completely cross-platform ranked with Steam, which wasn't the possibility before, and they also updated the game. They also did didn't Killer Instinct Gold port to Switch on NSO or something like that?
Well, they put the Super NES version on NSO. Which is,
that's what it was. Yeah. So not Gold. So I think Killer Instinct, since they're probably going to be doing a sequel to it or something like that in the future, they're going to port it to PS5.
I can see that. Yep.
And that's a game that is perfect for the platform, and it's perfect for the fighting game community. I also do think Halo MCC is perfect as a thing to bring to other platforms because the games are imminently, like you can put them on anything these days. At least the first, especially the earlier trilogy of games and whatnot, they run on anything. And that community, it's smaller and dedicated. It's not huge, but if suddenly all PlayStation people could play Halo 1, probably a bunch of people who've never played it, I'd imagine at this point, if you're a hardcore Sony person or something, well, then you'll realize this is like one of the best FPS genre games ever made, and you'll want to play that.
I mean, that also awesome. Assumes that those PlayStation players only play on that one machine. but
that's what I said. So yeah.
Interestingly, though,
I said like if you're hardcore.
I recall when we were talking to Phil back in 2020 when we were at visiting Microsoft HQ. I remember him kind of saying something like, "Yeah, when I tried to mention like bringing Master Chief Collection to the Switch, and he was like, "Yeah, I would enjoy playing the Master Chief Collection on something like a Switch." Not not like a confirmation of anything. It was just like it's not like an instant shoot it down kind of thing. Like, yeah, that would be pretty cool, huh? But I'm still skeptical that it will happen anytime soon.
We've kind of answered this question from SJ33 in brackets Jake, customary hi Jake in there, which is his point, which is let's put a positive spin on Microsoft going multi-platform. What Microsoft games would you like to see on other platforms and why? I personally would love to see Rare Replay as a Switch 2 launch title. Could happen on Switch 1, couldn't it?
It could.
In theory. I don't think it will happen due to having to port all the different emulators and individual games, but I think it would sell like gangbusters if it did happen! ! The audience for classic Rare games on a Nintendo platform is obvious. Yeah, we just saw that the NSO stuff for the legacy titles. So, yeah, that's an interesting alternative take on that. Any other Microsoft games you think should be on other platforms? That, stuff that really feels like it would be a good fit that wouldn't necessarily enrage the community.
Age of Empires on Switch 2 also. Any of the Age of Empires games, because I think Switch with its screen is actually far better than a normal controller actually for RTS games. So
would it have the horsepower CPU wise to do it?
Well, you could do Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, the remastering, which is more popular than AoE 4, and it's also a classic. So, or the new Age of Mythology, the remake, that'd be another great thing.
I mean, Crackdown would be awesome on the Switch.
Oh yeah,
original Crackdown.
Yeah.
Oh, that could be interesting.
Gosh.
I mean, here's the thing, right? I mean, if you look at a Nintendo platform, step back a generation and look at the library of untapped potential in terms of titles, and then bring those to the Switch, then suddenly it's like you'll find that both Microsoft and Sony have got an incredible amount of great games that would just run beautifully on that. So yeah, that's worth a thought. I'm really going to be interested to see how they continue this rollout of this multi-platform strategy, because I think putting out 4 titles in effectively the same launch window does sort of suggest that this has been actually in consideration for quite some time, and that there is probably a more advanced schedule that we're not quite aware of at the moment. And I'd love to see more, and particularly with associations with Nintendo, I feel it's like there's not really much to lose in terms of the fan base getting enraged, because fundamentally, there is this perception that Nintendo isn't actually a competitor to Microsoft and Sony, but fundamentally they are competing for people's time for playing games, which is like the most precious commodity aside from money, I guess. Anything more to say on this? I mean, yes, we did see the arrival of Hi-Fi Rush on PlayStation 5, Sea of Thieves on PlayStation 5. Again, I just feel that enough time has passed that any sort of toxicity is just
Sea of Thieves makes a ton of sense, especially because of the type of game it is, and it would basically be breathing new life into it, bringing a new subset of players into that world. I think that's cool. And they, you know what? Maybe they should even consider doing that for, I think it was Everwild, whatever Rare's doing next. If it's a similar type of thing, perhaps similar there. Like those types of, I say quote unquote service game, there's a service element to them where it's designed to be played over a long period of time with other people. It makes sense to get more platforms involved in those cases. But I feel like conversely, I can't imagine them wanting to say, bring that new Perfect Dark game they've been building or the new Gears or something over to PS5. That seems somewhat unlikely to me that they would want to do that, because those are like tentpole releases, big experiences that they can use to kind of push the platform. So it doesn't really benefit that much outside of just maybe making some extra money, but I still honestly believe there is a statute of limitations where even your best players come over.
I mean, and Phil hasn't ruled out bringing other bigger games across to alternative platforms. He said that in the interview with The Verge. I guess it's just a matter of feeling your way until you've find the right balance in terms of what games you want to put out and when you're going to put them out.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, they could totally get Microsoft Motocross Madness and Fury Cubed on the Switch. I think that would be a perfect
Why
fit.
not?
I would love new versions of that. Give me that Fury Cubed action on the Switch.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, there is now at least the sense that things are de-escalating, right?
Yes, exactly.
You'd hope. I mean, there does still seem to be a sort of a contingent of the Xbox audience that just aren't happy with this direction. But ultimately, I think it's just going to happen. And if they drip feed it in the way they seem to be doing it, I think ultimately it will work out okay.
So here's the thing, though, is I've seen a lot of, including people I've talked to, that they say they feel hurt by this and they feel like they're not respecting their Xbox customers. I've seen people claiming it's going to kill them. Like they feel like they trusted their whole gaming choices behind this console. And I feel like if you step back, let's say the Xbox was discontinued today. It's not going to be. It's going to continue. But if that were to happen, should that really rob you of the fun that you've had with it? I feel like as a fan of consoles that have been deemed absolute failures, I have a lot of experience with this. I love playing games on Sega Saturn. It's one of my favorite machines ever. I love the Dreamcast. I was having a good time here just the other day with the 3DO. These are not successful machines by and large, but the library is amazing. And there is a little bit of an extra risk when you're dealing with digital stuff, but I still think it shouldn't take away from the good times you've had on that machine. And the machine isn't just going to combust in your living room. You're going to access it. You don't need to have your one and only decision be that the only thing you play on, right? It's okay to have multiple platforms and enjoy things across all these different machines. Like in some cases there's monetary reasons for sticking with one platform, but I think a lot of people, it's just they don't want to touch other platforms for some reason. And I feel like if you open yourself up to just enjoying things on whatever, it's a lot more freeing and fun. And it's worth.
I'm just trying to think of any other form of entertainment media that has this kind of attachment fan bases, and I'm struggling.
I mean, there's a very small, there's some weird audiophiles out there that have like their specific wants and needs. There's the people that never gave up on HD DVD and they continue to rewatch the Fast and Furious movies.
What?
HD DVD version? No.
I mean, you got the best special features there. That's for sure.
The look and sound of perfect, if you will. Yeah. Actually, thinking about that medium, by the way, one benefit we didn't mention that I think is absolutely worth mentioning is the fact that some of these games are getting physical releases now. Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment, for starters, have been announced. They're getting disc versions or cart versions in the case of Pentiment, which is something
but not via Microsoft.
No.
Yeah. Right.
So
that's the weird thing.
It's not by Microsoft, but the fact that it's happening at all is very good news, I think, because for instance, I really wanted Hi-Fi Rush on a disc, and we didn't get that until now. And thankfully, that is happening through limited run. And I know people have their issues with them, but it is what it is, and I'm happy that exists either way. And they're still getting an Xbox disc version of these games, right? Like, I could see people being even more unhappy if they skip the Xbox versions, but you can buy the Xbox versions or pre-order them soon, disc versions as well, which I think is cool. I think that's great.
Mm-hmm. Do you think limited run would get into the lucrative HD DVD market?
I think we should suggest that to them.
They could port across all of the Blu-ray movies.
There you go.
A porting of the Blu-rays.
Porting the Blu-rays over to HD DVD. Well, they could make HD DVD.
I mean, the possibilities are endless. We'll have to pitch that, I think.
What about UHD VHS?
Do it. It's just a giant,
Matt,
room-sized spool at this point.
But maybe there's been new spool technology.
We're really sort of going out into the weeds with this one. So let's move on. Let's move on, please, to the next news topic. This week it was revealed that Nvidia has been working on a new app, an application that is essentially going to replace its control panel, about time too, and introduce a whole host of rather intriguing features, one of which we've already covered on the channel via a mod, RTX HDR. Initially designed just for video playback, modders found that it could be used for games as well to very impressive effect if you saw the video. And now it turns out that that is just one of the features that is included in this new Nvidia app. Alex, you've been hands-on, as it were. You have integrated the app into your system. What do you think of it? What does it do beyond HDR?
Okay, so it is replacing GeForce Experience, and eventually it does currently replace GeForce Experience if you install it, and it will eventually replace the MVCP. It sounds like so
yes,
the control panel will go away.
Yes,
you say yes, but John, don't.
No.
Yes.
No, I'm just saying like you have to be trepidatious about these things
true.
because MVCP came around in the Windows XP era. And back then, it was much faster than it is now, due to just the fact that it was a much smaller driver. It was like 25 megabytes or something originally. It wasn't big. Now it's almost a gig, and so it's so slow. It's using the same interface, same coding style.
So bad.
It's slow, but the thing is, it is chock full of ridiculous amount of features that are actually better than the features you see on AMD and Intel.
Okay.
And so the worrying part of them moving to the NV app, in my humble opinion, is that they're going to leave behind features that are still useful for legacy things that we want to use, that are just like, if you go to any niche community online, I'm like always a little bit worried about that. But so right now, the current NV app is replacing GeForce Experience, and it will eventually replace MVCP. The way it works right now is you load it up. It's ridiculously fast. That's the first thing you'll notice in difference. Right-clicking MVCP with Windows 10 right-click and getting into it is a laborious process. This one just loads up within like a second. It's super fast. It has a very fast interface that seems to be immediately responsive. And part of that you'll notice is when you go in a game, like with GeForce Experience, you can load this up. You hit Alt-Z, or there's probably another way to open it up that I can't think of right now. It doesn't require a login like GeForce Experience does, so you get access to it without logging in. When you get in a game, you have the ability to change the global and/or app-specific profile in-game, and that applies to certain things like the new features that Rich just talked about. RTX HDR can be turned on and off and adjusted. You can adjust like the, like whether or not you apply vibrance to it, saturation boosting, that is dynamic. It also, you can apply the max peak nit level, the mid-gray nit level. You can change the contrast. It's applied as one of the old GeForce Experience reshade style filters, and you can turn it on and off at will. It's very interesting. I think it works very, very well. With the new settings that they added in for RTX HDR, I was able to dial it in more appropriate to my set. For example, an LGC one I think is like max peak real nits 800 around or so, and the default of the app was actually 1000. So you can dial that in more specifically. That will change it from being less white blinding, for example, in Lost Planet, and things like that. So it'll preserve more. That was an interesting aspect of it. So I also sent Oliver some footage of MVCP running right next to the new NV app. And one thing I want to show about it too is that you'll see right now the global settings parameters of both of them open right next to each other. And you'll see there's quite a few more in the NVCP, the old NVCP. The reason for that is because it's currently still in a beta state, this NV app, and they said they are migrating over more of the features. They haven't announced which and if all they are migrating over, to be honest with you. So that's why I'm a little worried. But they did say they're going to bring over the video settings tabs, and I'm assuming that's like the resolution tabs too. So you'll be able to configure multi-monitor from this app in the future, as well as custom resolutions, which they definitely won't drop because if the competition has it, they definitely probably want it to, because you can do custom resolutions on the AMD side as well. The one other thing that I didn't talk about is you can also now bring up the Nvidia overlay in game and also do any of the performance monitoring, including latency, I don't know, VRAM speed, who knows? You can look at a lot of things. One of the things that I thought was curious that was missing is you can't look at how much VRAM is being used by the game.
Right.
Perhaps that's something they'll bring over. They have a number of other things that they've announced that they want to bring in as new features, including overclocking and overclocking control for those of you who use that. And also, curiously, DLSS control. And what that means is right now, I have no idea. But things I would like to see would be the ability to change the preset that it uses. NVIDIA has like 6 presets. Some are a little bit defunct now, so maybe they reduce it to the ones that are most commonly used. You could change the presets. That would change the model and would give you a different image resolve. Also being able to maybe on a per game basis disable the also now defunct DLSS sharpening. So for those of you who play Red Dead Redemption 2, instead of having to do some funky DLL swapping and making the game replace the DLL every single time you load it up, it's so annoying. Maybe you could do it on the driver level. Another thing would be able to change the internal resolution of the DLSS mode, which is what you can do with modding tools. But for here, it would be in the driver and it wouldn't be picked up by things like EAC at that point. And you could give old games that did not have DLAA, which
or beyond.
would be a great thing. Or
Super
beyond. I mean, there is actually the ability with the DLSS mods to super sample with DLSS.
That's awesome.
I've never tried it out, but it's one of the things that's good there. Right now, I think it is a good thing. I didn't see any big issues about usability with it. It is not a typical Windows style overlay. It is more modern, so you have to be used to that. But it also used screen real estate in a reasonable way. It didn't start full screen, which was nice. It did start at like a good 1080p on a 4K window, and you can full screen it, but there isn't really a good reason to, I don't see yet. Just once again, I want to make sure they port over as many legacy features as is reasonable. I don't expect everything like OpenGL extension limiting there, but in the end, it seems to use the exact same like file structure in the driver. So I do think NVIDIA Profile Inspector will still work even after they deprecate.
That was what I was going to say, because I prefer Profile Inspector personally, because I think it is faster to get into and out of, and it exposes all the same or more controls that the driver does. So like if we lose those features at the driver level, only in terms of what's presented in the interface, but they're still available on the back end, I think that would be an acceptable compromise.
I agree. I agree too. In the end, I mean, in the end, whenever I do apply SSAA to an older game, I never actually use MVCP because the profile inspector is more accurate.
Yep.
I think that's going to be the case in the end. I don't actually see them locking away that stuff because they've developed an entire community around Profile Inspector, and they don't seem to be. There isn't a really good reason to lock out.
It would behoove them to maintain that sort of relationship. I think it would just anger people if they disabled it.
There's no reason to.
No, there's zero reason to do that.
Yeah, and I also think when this goes out of beta and they replace it fully, I should probably make a video on it to talk about what it's doing differently and see like the speed advantages, as well as if they are missing things that I think are core, to give them some helpful critical feedback about that. They said they're open to critical feedback during the beta period or after, so maybe we could change things if we don't like something.
Okay, well, it is fundamentally making sure that those features that are in there are good. And, are still there. Stuff like frame rate limiting. Is there any frame rate limiting in the current app?
Actually, I don't. I think
Oh,
that maybe one of the
man.
ones that's currently not there, but I think it's going to be there. I can't recall off the top of my head, but they did offer 2 new features that I thought were interesting: AV1 encode
Oh,
for
Right.
RTX 4000, as well as 120 hertz FPS recording support for shadow play.
no way. Really? They added that?
Or whatever it is.
Oh, I've
They
been wanting
added
that
it.
forever. Because right now, the problem is if you're on a 120 monitor and you record shadow play, it still captures at 60, but it messes up the frame pacing. So you end up with this really
It does.
juddery looking video clip.
Yeah.
And also, conceivably, this would mean that I could then record at 4K 120 when necessary from the PC, right?
Yeah, without having an external capture
Without
card.
having an external capture card. So that's fantastic news.
I mean, Alex, that's 4K 120 is a bit of a big deal because, when we went into the DLSS 3 coverage, we had no way of doing 4K 120 at the time and had to
Reasonably, no.
had to sort of get together a massively compromised
Yep,
OBS
yep.
solution that bypassed shadow play completely,
Yep.
and it was problematic on many levels.
I also, Rich, you mentioned the frame rate limiting stuff. I would love to see Nvidia implement, you can bring up the current GeForce Experience menu. I've not used this new one. I assume you can do that in the new one. But it would be great to be able to limit the frame rate like the Steam Deck does.
That would be perfect.
Like being able to just have a slider to
do
set
that.
your max frame rate or whatever, change the refresh rate on the fly.
Yep.
Especially if this could like overcome some games that have issues with this anyway and sort of like push beyond them. Like for instance, what if that worked on the old Crysis 24 hertz bug or something?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. So really interesting thing is that actually, this is totally tangential.
Okay,
but
please.
Crysis 3, Rich, Crysis 3, the original release is broken on Windows 10 and above. You can
Yes.
fix it with in the Nvidia driver or in RTSS by applying arbitrary frame rate caps above 60. So you could put it to like 400, and for some reason it fixes the frame rate issues.
Okay, cool. Well,
It doesn't even
actually,
make sense, but
it
I don't
will
know why
return
that
to the
is.
benchmark suite then.
Yeah, it can
All
return to the
right.
benchmark suite. I'm serious, but
Highly explosive
it's just
material.
this little caveat that you'll have to limit it to something like below 1,000 FPS.
That's outrageous.
Really?
It's outrageous.
Hello?
Maybe, I don't know. I don't know actually how far
I'll
it goes.
accept it.
But I thought that was funny. But I would love that. I think the ability for it to now be like the way it's done on AMD as well as Intel is almost like wholly committed to this kind of interface, more so than AMD is. I think it'll allow them some great things in the future. I think it's also, since the new RTX HDR and the RTX Vibrance thing are like AI powered filters, I think that opens the door to very interesting filters in the future that they could do, including like dumb AI upscale filters for games that are like resolution limited. You could do stylization filters, like painterly filters and things like that for games, or cell shading for games. There's a lot of things that they can do with this in the future.
I would love the Steam Deck like scaling options that they build into the interface, where you can instantly just say, let's say you're outputting like 1080p and you say do a nearest neighbor upscale integer scale to 4K,
Right.
But like being able to do it dynamically from within that little sort of side menu, because right now the scaling features in the Nvidia CP, they do kind of support that, but the way it works is very fiddly and it's not really usable on my setup. So seeing that optimized and
I agree
improved
with
would
that.
be amazing.
Yeah, because like right now that's not in the NV app, any of these features. That's all still MVCP. But right now, like in the MVCP, there's no footage of this. But like when you turn on integer scaling, it's like blanks the whole desktop. It switches to GPU scaling. It's not fast. It's not per app. Which I think
Right.
is
It
another
also,
issue.
so I'm using the LG OLED as a screen, and it detects that 4096 by 2160 res as the target container for integer scaling, which is not what you actually want.
F you.
And I tried using CRU to remove that res, and then it broke the NVIDIA control panel entirely, and I had to like do a driver uninstaller and like remove every instance of it, then reinstall the driver to get it back. So like it's very messy right now.
Oh my God. Yeah. So better integer scaling, better chosen scaling, taking, tips from the Steam
Yeah,
Deck.
seriously, just look at
here.
the Steam Deck and be like, yes, we should do these things in our driver and allow you to bring it up anytime and then make adjustments. That would be absolutely a killer feature.
So we had this question from Samsung, but we've basically not Samsung.
Samsung?
Samsung.
Samsung,
Is it little
like
Samsung?
like the biblical figure.
Yeah, the biblical figure.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Let's big him up, literally. Anyway, hey DF team, in brackets, exclamation mark. How are you guys enjoying the new Nvidia app and its newly robust overlay with new features like RTX HDR and RTX Dynamic Vibrance? I think we've covered that already. It's about time, but I wonder if you share my desire that Nvidia don't completely discontinue the old school control panel. All in all, I'm happy to see Nvidia finally have to catch up with AMD for once. That's an interesting point because the overlay that AMD has had, and it's just kind of nicer to be with.
Yeah,
it's nicer to
much
use.
more
The
pleasing.
Nvidia one has just been an embarrassment for many years now.
Yeah.
And it's just weird. It's one of these pieces of software that you could probably throw one of those liquid nitrogen cooled 9 gigahertz i9s at it, and it would still run slowly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, hitting apply is terrifying in the
It
MVC.
is, yeah. What's going to happen?
And when it tries to populate the list of potential games on your system, you want to do a custom profile, and it's just like, I'm just going to freeze up for a minute. You just hang out, and you can't do anything. No amount of system power can solve that problem.
I'm okay with the old control panel going as long as Profile Inspector's still there.
Same.
Yes, Profile Inspector would still have to work for me to be okay with that. If it didn't, then I'd make really big noise.
I 100% agree. The thing about that MVCP, and the reason I wanted to go, is because one of the weird nitpicks I have with Windows 11 is that there's still a lot of weird legacy Windows stuff in there, which sometimes has its use, but it feels very weird, almost like whiplash when you open up the thing. It's like, oh, this is like an old Windows XP era feeling control panel, or a Vista era feeling thing that's still kind of
Vista
still
stuff.
exists here in Windows. They don't really want you to find it, but you can get there if you want. And for an operating system, I do kind of get that, but it does make it feel a little bit janky in a weird way. And having that, so just having that NVCP still live there like that on top of this new thing would feel similar to me, where it's like, yeah, this is ancient and probably should go away. But like you said, only if the functions are duplicated and still allowed through the inspector.
Yeah, which is the issue I have with Windows 11, where it takes away reasonable functionality. Like the recent thing I've read is that group policy editor is not working correctly for a while now. And I actually did try and mess with it recently, and it didn't work. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I hope Nvidia doesn't take cues from Microsoft here and just not do it right. They should do it right, the transition.
Fair enough. Okay. I think that's all we've got to say about the Envy app at the moment. Interested to see how it evolves and what new features are going to be added.
Absolutely.
I mean, RTX HDR was certainly a head turner, to say the least. And clearly there's a lot more in the pipeline. But let's move on to the next news story. Okay, so this is quite interesting. Obviously, the PlayStation Portal, it's a remote play streaming device and nothing else. But at its heart, it is an Android device. It can run code, it can play games, it can run emulators, but it's simply not a part of Sony's feature set. However, the PlayStation Portal has now been hacked by some Google security researchers, by the look of it. Actually, looking at the guy who does it, he's actually done a number of exploits for PlayStation equipment in the past. And so it's interesting to see that we've now got an emulator running on the Portal. So, John, why don't you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so it seems like he has PPSSPP, which I always imagined was meant to be spoken out loud with an echo, like PSP or something like that. But they have that running natively on the Portal, which is, I think, actually fantastic. And that is
it's a proof of concept.
Right. It's the first example we have of actual gaming-based software running natively on this hardware, which is something we had thought about. You know, the idea of turning this into like an emulator system. It's got a nice big screen. The controls we can expect are quite good, since it is essentially a DualSense. The only question I have here, and I'm trying to find if there's an answer to it, is the storage.
Right.
Oh, it was very small. It was like 6 gigs. Yeah, that thing.
He said it needs about 6 gigs of internal storage. Is that how much? That's how much it has.
That's how much is available for them to.
Yeah. So they have
very small.
So that So that's very, very small, but at the same time, it's workable enough for a fair amount of stuff. Like
older games,
older games.
PSP, PS1. I mean, what's the problem? It's plenty of
Well,
space.
I mean, to get them running, you wouldn't be able to store that many of them on there at that. But if
that's the issue.
if you delve into like say older like 16-bit machines, not there's a million ways to play that stuff now, but still, you could potentially store a lot more stuff on there. But yeah, just having it function as something else, the fact that it could potentially be cracked open in this way kind of makes it just more useful, because I feel like as it is, it's an accessory that doesn't work. It doesn't work as well as it should. Right.
Right. Well, it's basically a case of untapped potential, right? Because it's a reasonable mid-range chipset in there. It's running on Android. There's no reason why it couldn't be running all of those PlayStation classics that were on the PlayStation Store.
That's my feeling, and I feel like they really missed a trick there. Where if this had released and say, yeah, this streams PS5, but also it has access to the full range of PlayStation classics, for instance.
Yeah.
So you get PS1 games, PS2 games, that would be an awesome way to expand the value of it, let people play with it natively, and then it becomes sort of more of a portable system, because right now it's not actually a portable system. You basically can't use it outside of your house. Trying to do so produces even worse results than when you're right next to the system.
Yeah, that's true. It is all based on streaming, right? So the quality, I mean, this is the whole bone of contention with the Portal, is that the quality of the experience scales according to how good your internet connection is, or basically how good your Wi-Fi network is. But even then, there are hard set limits which limit its potential. So the concept of being able to actually be able to run software locally does have much to commend it. And yeah, it could become a really nice, legacy PlayStation software player that you could take to work or on your commute or whatever, which you can't really do now. So yeah, this is obviously a very welcome development, even if it is wholly unofficial. They are pointing out that it is going to be, there's no official release for this exploit yet, and there's still apparently a lot of work to do. And apparently it took them a month of hard work to actually quote unquote crack the PlayStation Portal.
Ooh, okay.
So yeah, I'd be interested to see how this develops and when there is actually going to be an official release. But once there is, I guess it's going to be weapons free on emulation, and we could see some really, really interesting results there. Because fundamentally, there's a lot to commend this device. The controller is a dual sense effectively, so it's a good controller. The screen, it's an LCD. It's nice. It's a good screen, 1080p. Color reproduction is fine for an LCD. I've got no real issues with that. It's just, the fact that it's just a streaming only remote client has always been the issue.
Even in this current environment, though, when I think about it, it's like, oh yeah, I think that's neat, but would I still want one? Probably not. I mean, there's nothing that you could do on here better than what you would get on, say, a Steam Deck OLED right now. Right.
Or
you can already stream PS5 to a Steam Deck, I believe.
Yes.
And better quality.
It is a different class of device, one might argue.
But technically, yes. But when you look, the price of the Portal is still pretty high, I think, considering what it does. And if you find like a used Steam Deck LCD model, you can often get those down closer to that price even. And I feel like that's just a much better thing to purchase.
So much more utility.
There's so much more to it.
You can do PC gaming.
Do whatever you want on that thing, basically.
Emulating games on it. You can stream off.
And like the emulation stuff on Steam Deck, I have fiddled with that some. Like getting Model 3 emulation running on that thing, and then integrating them into the Steam Deck OS, so that it just looks like it's a Steam game, and you're just running it, and now you're playing Daytona 2 on your Steam Deck. With native res for the game, integer scaled up to the full screen. Like it's an awesome experience, man. I love the Steam Deck.
Mm-hmm.
What a machine. I'm still professing my love for that thing.
I'm very happy about that, John, because the conversion process to get you on board, it literally required a hardware redesign.
I said it all those months ago, back before that. It's like, I'm not buying this until there's an OLED model. And then they did it.
Fair enough. Okay, so yes, there's obviously going to be more news to come with this exploit for the portal, and hopefully there will be a public release at some point. But let's move on to the next news story. So this one came out of nowhere yesterday, and it's a highly welcome development on the face of it, because there's a lot of detail which we seemingly lacking at the moment. But on the face of it, the news is that Sony is going to allow PC games, or a selection of PC games. It's uncertain how this all works. They're allowing those titles to run on PlayStation VR2, which is a feature I never thought we'd see happen, simply by virtue of the fact that, typically speaking, a console or a console peripheral is subsidized by the sale of software, right? But it looks like Sony is going to remove some of the shackles on the PSVR2. Highly welcome development, John, but what do you think this actually means?
Well, when you look carefully at the wording, so they do say this offers additional access to games on PC for even more variety, in addition to the PSVR titles available through PS5. So that does really sound like they're splitting them up, saying you can access these through PS5 as always, but there's also now this alternate method, which suggests to me then that maybe they are finally allowing you to just use it with PC. But there's still hurdles to cross there, because the PSVR2 uses USB-C for everything, and you can't just plug that into most PCs, right? To get video,
just a random USB-C.
You can't plug it into your motherboard and get good anything out of it on most systems. I mean, there are some laptops, I guess, where you can plug USB-C in and get video, but graphics cards with USB-C they don't really exist much anymore, as far as I know. Like Nvidia used to have a USB-C on there at some point. I feel like I remember having an Nvidia card too. What's that?
RDNA 2, I think, had USB-C, but that didn't continue.
So it ended on both of them. So this makes you wonder: is it only going to support select machines, or is Sony actually going to sell some sort of PC adapter kit, where it's you just buy this little thing for your PSVR2, and now it's splits out the USB HDMI or / DisplayPort. Right. Would probably be DisplayPort. Basically turn it into what other wired PC VR headsets do, right? And I think if they sell a little kit like that and just make it work and allow Steam VR to see it, replicate the dual, or whatever they're called, the touch controller, I forget what they're called now. The PSVR2 controllers. So there's basically,
they have a name.
I feel like they have a name, but either way,
they do.
Just integrate that into the Steam VR ecosystem, even unless there's another potential thing. I think Sony has indicated, and I think this is not a good idea, but they have indicated that they want it to build a PC front end, their own PC app store kind of thing, which please don't do that, guys. Stay on Steam. I don't think they understand how much bad blood that would create just by adding another launcher. People do not want that. They don't want it. Adding another one, it's not going to work. And Sony has a bad track record with those types of things anyway. I think it would be a disaster for them. If they just support this and their games continue on Steam, that's the way forward. And just
don't think they can turn their back on Steam. I mean, Microsoft tried and failed, right?
Yeah.
They came back.
And Microsoft pretty much owns the most popular operating system, right? So and they could not do it. They have Game Pass on the PC, and again, even if it's doing well, it's not. People still, they want their stuff on Steam. And I think Sony has to respect that to continue to find the success. And hopefully they look at what happened with Helldivers and be like, oh yeah, day and date on PC, this on Steam, this is the way.
Yeah, one might hope that what's happened with Helldivers, which has seen phenomenal success on PC, has been what Arnold Schwarzenegger would call a teachable moment.
Yes.
Where, they sort of see this, it's okay, well, there are more players potentially here on PC than there are on PlayStation. Is that a bad thing? I mean, fundamentally, I don't think so.
No, not at all.
No.
But again, similar to the Microsoft situation, possibly there would be some games that would require the timed exclusive angle. I mean, something like a story-driven escapade like The Last of Us Part 2. But even then, I still think that, I still think that the console and the PC markets are separate and distinct to the point where, day and date releases aren't a bad thing. I guess the one argument against it is that Microsoft hasn't enjoyed phenomenal success in the console space.
That's why I think it would behoove them, if they're going to do this, just the shorten that window, right? Give it like a 6-month lead, something like that.
Okay.
Right. And that would also be enough, hopefully, extra time for them to make sure that the PC version is really polished, because obviously PC version built alongside the console game, presumably an external partner or, their internal Nixies or something is working on it. It's probably easier for Nixies to get that done. They're working alongside the team, but then at the end there, it would probably be easier to have a little time post-release to work with the development team that's finished shipping the main game and kind of make sure that the PC version's good. But by reducing that window, I think they would sort of reignite excitement around the game in that same year, and it would probably also lead to increased PlayStation 5 sales as well. People like, oh yeah, that game. So I don't know.
Returning to the PSVR2, I mean, obviously, as far as we know, there's no Wi-Fi receiver in the headset, so it's got to be a tethered solution one way or another. And as you pointed out, the issue is that it's using the USB-C video protocol, which isn't really well supported anymore, unfortunately. I guess the sort of workaround for that would be some kind of streaming solution like we see on the Oculus Quest, right?
So, man, to make that work, oh yeah, okay. So I was thinking about just the headset itself, like plugging something into the USB-C cable. But you're right.
Yeah,
If the PS5 itself served as like the access thing, could potentially work. It's just that what we know is that the PS5's hardware doesn't really seem to be capable of doing decent
internet.
So what you're saying is that I can see exactly the issue now. The Oculus Quest has a video decoder built into the headset. We just don't know whether there is the same on PlayStation VR2. Probably not.
Which is why
So we're back to square one.
They could have a little. It would be super clunky, but like a little thing that you plug, like a little box or something that you plug your PSVR into that like has its own decoding. That's far fetched. They're not going to do that. But I just
you might as well just do an HDMI converter.
I think that's what they kind of have to do. I just don't see any other way. And if it is just, you just got to find a PC with USB-C for video, then that's like, that's not great.
Yes.
No modern GPU.
But still,
almost.
the PSVR2 headset is very good. It's capable of 120 hertz, which you could take advantage of on PC. It's got the HDR screens, the eye tracking, all that kind of stuff. This is all stuff that could really be awesome for use with PC games.
Do you think there'd be any danger that people will be buying it when they don't own a PlayStation 5, or is the MetaQuest 2/3 simply the preferred solution in that scenario?
That scenario, I would still prefer the Quest 3 just because of the wireless. The only thing that would make me give pause, and I have to see how it works on the PC, is that the Quest 3 obviously does not do HDR. And it is using LCDs, so when you're in a dark environment in a game, you see a lot of LCD backlight glow, which you don't get with the PSVR2 because it is OLED based, so it's nice and dark.
Interesting. So, what do you think next steps would be? Because obviously bringing PSVR2 to PC isn't as straightforward as it sounds, right?
Right. I think that whatever solution they choose, they need to make sure it's spelled out carefully enough that it's actually something people will want to and be able to do. But I think obviously the main driver here is that it would presumably push more people to take interest in the hardware because they've not been able to provide enough software. There's some good stuff on PSVR 2, but it's clearly not getting the attention that they might have hoped for, right? And this could potentially drive that up. And you'd imagine there is going to be a subset of these people that maybe were on the fence about a PSVR 2, and then it's like, oh, now I can play PC games with this too. That might push them over. It would give them access to some of those high-end PC experiences that are not on PSVR.
Finally, Alex comes to PSVR 2.
Exactly. It would finally happen and allow it, because I think everybody that has even a slight interest in anything Half-Life needs to play that game. It's unbelievably good. It's still good.
Or passing interest in VR.
Or in VR, yeah. It's still arguably the best VR game out there, just in terms of the experience it delivers.
Certainly an interesting change in strategy from Sony to actually make this happen.
It is a change in strategy, and probably one necessitated by lack of success with PSVR2.
Well, yeah, fundamentally, yeah. Okay, I'm just not entirely clear on the logistics of this. It sounds a bit more complicated than just okay. Now you could use your headset with a PC. It sounds like there's going to be some confounding factors, as Alex would call it, that's going to make it a bit more challenging. But certainly can't wait to hear more on this. And with that, we are at the end of the news section of this particular edition of DF Direct
Rich,
Weekly.
there's one,
or are we?
Well, we are at the end of the news section, but I felt that at this point in the show, we should check in with Mark Triforce Duddleson to see how many stars he's collected in Super Mario 64. Mark?
48.
He's collected 48 stars in Mario 64 since we started recording.
Holy crap.
Is this a speed run?
It's not a speed run.
Just a run.
It's just a normal run for him through Mario 64.
Bad. But that game's really good.
This is a man that knows his Mario 64.
Okay.
Oh, has he ever played the PC port? You should introduce him to the PC port.
I should.
John.
I will have to introduce him to the
Holy
to the
crap,
native
the PC port. Oh, the native PC port's so good. Oh god, yeah, like 100.
Okay.
Show him at like 4K 120 FPS.
4K 120. Yeah, that's the way.
Or maybe upscaled. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there we are, 48 stars. We'll check again at the end to see how many stars he has obtained.
Good stuff. But John,
yes,
things have happened. There have been developments. I have excellent news for you.
What?
A few weeks ago on DF Direct Weekly, I think you'll recall that you unfairly impugned the reputation of AMD's Radeon 7.
I did, yeah.
You mixed it up with the Vega 7 graphics within an integrated
I did.
chip.
But it got me
that
hungry.
Could not be allowed to stand. So, the first thing I did was to get my Radeon 7 out of storage and to show you its true unbridled power. The problem is it didn't work anymore. So you can see in the background there, it's now returned as a kind of ornament,
in the window,
if you like, within my office. But look at this, this baby.
He got it. He got a new one. It's a new Radeon 7.
I have a new Radeon 7. Well, it's not new because
sure.
It's been out of production for quite some time. But I have to send a shout out to, let's have a quick look here, Chriz86, DF Supporter.
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
He saw one of these on I think it was a Swiss auction site. And he says he wants to support the DF project, so he acquired it and sent it my way. Now the question is, how are we going to test this baby?
Oh, we need to come up with a suite.
Well, this has been sort of dovetailing into my thoughts on how you would reassess an old GPU for modern times, right? And I'm going to send you a link on Slack actually, and you can see what I've done there. And what I have done is I have stacked up the Radeon 7 up against the PlayStation 5 using our new PlayStation 5 benchmarking suite and the Radeon RX 6700, which is the closest equivalent part to the PlayStation 5 within the graphics space at the moment. And we're going to kick off with Avatar Frontiers of Pandora here, as you can see. And we can go through the methodology. I mean, it's all in the PlayStation 5 6700 video. But look, Radeon 7. This is a 2019 GPU. No ray tracing support. It's running Avatar.
Wait, I can't see the link. It says video unavailable.
You have to log into the DF YouTube, John.
You have to be on the DF Clips channel.
Oh, it's a Clips. Okay, got it.
I had to hide the surprise from you.
You did. You successfully did it. Okay, I found it.
He did.
All right, here we go.
Yeah. So, check that out. It's not too bad, but, bearing in mind there's ray tracing involved here. But Alex, there's a fallback for this, right?
There's a software fallback. It's very interesting. It works and looks pretty much the exact same.
Yeah, but, looking at the scores here, PlayStation 5, 52 FPS, Radeon 7, 45.6. So, that fallback's working okay. It's not bad, right?
Right, and then we get to the next scene, next game.
The next scene, yeah. This one is Hitman, which is a game which has a bizarre underperformance issue on PlayStation 5. You can see there that the PC GPU, the 6700, that's closest to PlayStation 5, wipes the floor with it. And yeah, Radeon 7 it's outperforming PlayStation 5 here in Hitman. And let's just bring up the stats here on this China scene. China, as Donald Trump would say. 56.4 FPS average on PlayStation 5, 72.9 on Radeon 7. So another great Radeon win, I would
Somebody
say.
Give me the trash can so I can put my PS5 in there and just get a Radeon 7.
Yep.
Yes, immediately toss that PS5.
We've got another Hitman scene, but it produces the same results, effectively. The same performance differentials there. A big tree in Berlin.
Yeah, Radeon 7.
Which that totally doesn't look anything like the outskirts of Berlin, but yeah.
Well, you say that, Alex, but as you know, that whole mission takes place within a Berlin discotheque.
This is true.
You know, which is very on brand for Berlin. Let's skip ahead to Alan Wake 2 here. Now, we've got problems here because there's no mesh shader support on the Radeon 7.
Oh, oh no. All right, let's get the PS5 back out.
Yeah, basically, well, we'll talk about some of the more hilarious after effects of this, but yeah, the performance is not great. Basically, 49 FPS average, 50 FPS, let's say, on PlayStation 5, and it's 24.3 on the Radeon 7 there.
That's pretty low.
And yeah, less than half the performance of the PlayStation 5 there. But do you notice something a bit weird about the clip on the right there?
Oh, it's missing. It's missing. It's just like there's just polygons not there. Like the tree, it's just like this weird.
Yep.
What the?
Yeah,
it's completely glitched out. It's whoa, that's super broken.
I have prepared a secondary video for you here, so you can see basically the full capture in its glory there. The initial scene you've got.
Oh my god! She has no body. It's just a floating head and
there's
weapon.
No body. There's just and if you look at the,
it looks like some sort of Lovecraftian horror, like just the head with like all these entrails coming out.
This is genuine.
Yeah,
this is so creepy looking.
Basically, a lot of the geometry is warped or just vanished completely.
It's so oh man, this reminds me of the creepy baseball man glitch from MLB The Show that one year.
Oh god, don't ever mention that. I hate that thing. Oh god, that is the worst.
This is like bringing back like there's repressed memories.
Why did you even recall
I'm sorry,
that? That's
Alex.
awful.
It's the worst.
I hate that image.
Yeah, so let's just say that the Radeon 7 isn't performing great on Alan Wake 2, which is a bit of a
pour one out for the Radeon 7.
Shocker.
Let's go back to good news.
What's next?
A Plague Tale Requiem. Yeah, which is interesting because here, let me bring up the stats once again. I mean, obviously the frame rate numbers. Yep, the frame rate numbers look pretty good. I mean, in theory, if the Radeon 7 was competing with the RTX 2080 back in the day, then it should be doing this, right? It should be producing results that are more comparable to the PlayStation 5. And let me just bring up the stats there. PS5, 36.5 FPS average, and yeah, basically 97% of PlayStation 5 performance there on a Plague Tale. Okay. So, you know, it does have its moments. It can do some good stuff. I think, you know, well, we'll talk about some of the variances of the results here. I mean, I did do The Last of Us Part 1 as well.
Oh, is that the next one?
It is the next one.
Oh, yeah, I see
this particular cutscene, always under the 40 FPS
it's very cinematic on the Radeon 7.
It is literally cinematic.
Yeah, they should just have a 24 FPS lock. Just to be done with it. But yeah, this is an example of what is we've described as a quote unquote bad port, because you can see there that the RX 6700, which is effectively the PlayStation 5 GPU in PC form, is massively underperforming.
Right. And
the Radeon 7 can't escape. It's just not great. Yeah, so we're looking at a 36.2 FPS average on PS5. Dropping to 24.8 on the Radeon 7, 68% of PS5 performance. So yeah, there's also another bit, a cutscene that follows this, which is just in gameplay. So
right,
and yeah, that's not great either. In fact, the differentials are worse.
Oh yeah.
it's running better on PS5
63%
here.
now of the PS5's performance there.
You should Crossfire X that baby, Rich, to really unlock its full potential.
Yeah, there's a bonus clip at the end here with Cyberpunk running around the Cherry Blossom marketplace. This uses dynamic resolution scaling. Now, Alex, I'm pretty sure at this point that the DRS on PS5 doesn't work, because the reason I'm getting those sustained drops is because I'm running about. But if I just slow down, the performance drop is less pronounced. And if I stop, it's back to 60.
Yeah, I unless some weird streaming thing is happening, I can't imagine anything else.
Yeah.
Can you turn off motion blur in the game?
It's off here.
Oh, it is. Good.
Yeah.
Maybe you should hand me maybe that raw footage, and I'll do some counts on the PS5 version if you still have it raw.
Yeah, I've got
like
all
it
the
raw.
Yeah. Oh god, that's a good song.
And the final clip is the same thing, but without DRS active on the PC parts, where you can see that the 6700 performs very much like the PlayStation 5, but the Radeon 7 is like
a bit lower,
fairly slower. So again, that does suggest to me that DRS works on PC, but doesn't seem to work on PlayStation 5. But that's all of the results there. And what could I say? It's a really interesting example of the perils of older GPUs, I guess.
Right.
Because this is using the Vega technology from AMD, and they don't produce drivers for Vega anymore. Nope. And I think that's the reason why Alan Wake has that breakup. Because there's no Alan Wake driver support for Vega, and that's producing those results there. So there are GPUs we've tested that do have support, RDNA 1 for example, and there's no breakup there, but it is slower.
A good deal.
I mean, I would say if you really want, if Alan Wake 2 wasn't scary enough for your taste, then playing on a Radeon 7
it would be even more terrifying.
Yeah, it is like some sort of weird journey to trip out city.
It kind of has that look of like, is this what an AI dreams about when it thinks of Alan Wake 2? Like, it looks like some kind of...
Are you suggesting that the Radeon 7 here has gained sentience? And,
I mean, look at it. I bet one of these nights you're going to wake up, and come downstairs and peer into your office here, and it's going to be this big red glow, and you're like, what is that? And it's that little red thing in the corner there on the Radeon 7. It's going to be like sentient and glowing, and it's going to ask you to do a task for it, and then it will only multiply from there. So be careful.
It's going to...
So I was quite happy with the results of this test, and also the idea, because I've always been a bit iffy about going back and re-reviewing old GPUs, because the temptation is to say how great they are, and you look at results like a Plague Tale, it's like, hey, this is holding up really, really well. And the reality is that when you start factoring in new technologies, new games, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? And that's not great. And similarly, back in the day when the Radeon 7 came out, 2019, the argument was that you could either buy one of these, which has got 16 gigs of RAM, or you could buy the RTX 2080, which had, the DX12 Ultimate feature set, but only had 8 gigs of RAM. And,
right.
The concept was that over time the extra memory would be more important than the features, but you can play Alan Wake 2 on an RTX 2080 just fine. You can play Avatar at full speed even, and it works just fine. So there is something to be said about extra memory, but ultimately the features are kind of winning out there over the course of time there. So yeah, it's been quite an interesting... I mean, what was originally just going to be a joke item has actually turned into something quite interesting.
It is interesting. Just don't get that Radeon 7 too close to the dead Radeon 7, or you might have a nanite situation, kind of like if Wesley Crusher shows up at your house and wants to do some experiments, you might be in trouble.
What do they call them? The microbrains?
They're like...
What are they called?
I thought they were just like the nanites, but...
Oh, are you talking about the two that reproduced the episode with exactly. The guy from Scrubs, Bob Kelso?
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Well, maybe my prior Radeon 7 gained sentience and just decided to end its existence.
It died on the day when I mistook the benchmark.
When you needed it the most.
Exactly.
It failed. It just said nope. And that was the end of that. So yeah, interesting stuff there. And thanks once again to Chriz86 for sending me this. It's hugely appreciated. And I've got to say, I still really like the design.
Beautiful
and I really
card,
like
yeah.
the finish, and the red lights are all really awesome. So yeah, it's good to have a working one back in the DF labs. But that is the end of the news for this week. Not that was news as such. It was news for me to see this arriving on Tuesday.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I was expecting a GPU package to arrive, but not that one.
You really hid that under your hat. I had no idea that was coming.
It is amazing stuff, though. But let's move on. So this is now Supporter Q&A, the time of the show where we, every week we put a post on our Patreon saying, hey, send us some questions, send us some comments about the news topics we're likely to be talking about in the latest edition of DF Direct Weekly. And every week we get a big bunch of excellent questions, and we choose the best, or rather the ones that we're most equipped to answer. But I've got to say, there have been some great ones this week, so maybe we'll do some sort of Q&A special for supporters. First question, though, this one from Bjork Tribe. Hi, gents, smiley face. In the age of ray tracing, why do games often still forgo using mirrors? Even Alan Wake 2, the graphical darling of 2023, leaves out many mirrors. For those that work, they are weird, warbled messes with high roughness that look more like a road texture than a pristine slab of glass. Thank you for your considerations, and cheers! Exclamation point. Fairly simple answer for this one, right, Alex?
I think it's artist intent in this one,
really?
At least for at least Alan Wake, but also I think at least for Alan Wake, because the game was built with path tracing in mind, I think the mirrors are not supposed to be perfect,
right?
Intentionally, because the game does have perfect mirror things. For example, like you can go to like puddles of water on the ground, and they're basically perfect mirrors.
So it could technically work.
It technically works, but they've set up the material to be pretty rough for some reason. I don't know why. Ask the developers in that case. But also ray trace reflections. You got to think about those console versions. They're not going to be running ray trace reflections always. They may not be running them at a high enough resolution where that mirror looks particularly good. So they'll still do like the broken mirror thing that every game does since eternity. Like, yeah, all the mirrors are smashed everywhere you go.
That's a lot of bad luck.
Yeah, I think games still being multi-platform and not always having RT reflections on console is one of the bigger considerations. And even for games that do have RT reflections, like Spider-Man, they don't tend to actually use them for mirror reflections. They still do geometry doubling and or render to texture. Interestingly enough, that was the thing that I recall being in Spider-Man Miles Morales. I don't know if they use any mirrors in Spider-Man 2, John. Do they?
I can't remember, but I think the reason there would just be that in those very constrained scenes, like render to texture would just look better. Because I think the thing you got to keep in mind, especially with the reflections, is like it's basically would show what's in the BBH structure. It's like peering into another world almost, an alternative reality, right? And depending on how that BBH is optimized, it can look kind of gnarly in a way, right? When you're with rough surfaces, it kind of hides that somewhat and it ends up looking really good. But if you just have a perfect mirror, you can analyze every pixel of that reflection, what's inside the BBH, and see like, oh wow, okay, they really cut some corners in here for performance. And it can look a little odd, where in that case, like, well, if you're in that apartment, you got that mirror, you actually want it to look legitimately like it's really mirroring the exact scene. Using RTT there would give you a much better result.
Yeah.
Right.
You get things like AO in it. Full character model quality stuff. Everything that definitely wouldn't, like on Spider-Man, like it's like you have to think about it, like also in Spider-Man and a lot of games they only update like skinned models every other frame. So it'd be like it would render at like half the refresh rate, and it'd probably look really
also
awkward.
The denoising, when you factor that in, would probably make it look rather smeary. And
depending upon how they do it. Right?
So there's a lot of reasons I would say they don't want to just use it there. And it's not that it's a problem with ray tracing specifically. It's due to the speed ups that they use to make it playable in these games. that when you do that perfect mirror, it's not necessarily going to look amazing, but
yeah, really depends. So that's a good answer. Yeah.
Alex, Hitman 3, or Hitman as it is now, that actually used, it's got RT reflections, but it's also got the sort of brute force mirrors as well,
yeah,
right?
it does.
Yeah, it does. I forget. Did they replace them?
That's the
oh
question
God, I
was gonna
covered
ask.
that. I can't remember. There's a lot of bathroom scenes in that game, and I should probably go back and look at the toilets first of all. But and then but I remember what they did in that game is they kept the RTT system running, and they used it for mirror like reflections in reflections.
Right.
I think at that point,
Oh, that's
which
interesting.
was really interesting. Instead of tracing extra rays, if I recall. So that was pretty cool. I have to go back to Hitman. When I covered that on release, I was pretty upset with the CPU performance. It wasn't very good. Also, I felt like some of the RT performance wasn't so great. And like, yeah, sorry, John.
I feel like Hitman 2 and 3, the recent ones, didn't they really lean heavily on planar reflections as well?
Yeah.
If I recall.
And mixed with RTT too.
Right.
They mixed all of them. They used SSR as well.
Yeah, they
very
mixed all
system.
the technologies together. It's interesting.
Yeah. And it worked out for some stages more than others. But that would be a good one to go back to and see what happened. I'm pretty sure it's replaced by ray traced reflections, which could arguably look better in that game.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, it is heavy on RT. It still is, based on my recent benchmarking spree. But it is what it is. It does have reconstruction, so there we go. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. This one from Kyrith, or Kirith, I don't know. Hello, DF, exclamation point. Wonderful week of visuals, as per usual, exclamation point. When we look at PS4 games ported to Switch, we call them quote-unquote impossible ports because the generational divide in fidelity is profound. Yet, when discussing the odd pacing of the current gen consoles, I keep hearing the argument that the lengthy cross-gen period was justified because consoles just aren't that different from each other anymore. I think this argument is nonsense. Alan Wake 2 on PS4 would be a quote-unquote impossible port on par with The Witcher 3 on Switch, while God of War Ragnarok is clearly a PS4 game ported forward. The Horizons, Forza and Forbidden West are the only cross-gen games that feel legitimately transformative on current gen hardware. I just don't think this scalability is solved, so cross-gen is fine argument holds water. What do you think? What do you think, Alex?
I don't know if Alan Wake 2 is the best example.
You could scale that. It just wouldn't be using the same systems, right? It would be
I think
the whole geometry pipeline would be redone.
I think something like a UE5 game might be better. One that only works with Lumen. And then if they made that work on PS4, I would say that is then impossible because Lumen doesn't scale down to devices of that compute power reasonably. I think we've shown that with Steam Deck having troubles in spite of it being a newer architecture. Like Steam Deck is okay, but like as soon as Lumen kicks in, the resolutions would be pretty unacceptable, I think, on a PS4, which is tied to a TV and not a little screen.
Yeah. UE5 is actually a good candidate also for the CPU footprint, which is vast and would never be done on a Jaguar.
No.
GPU, I don't think it would be too much of a problem on say, an Xbox One X or even a PS4 Pro if you really shrunk the
One X
resolution
should
down.
be able to run it for sure, actually.
But you still got the CPU problem, which
got the CPU issue.
Should be a big problem. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Any thoughts on this one, John?
Yeah, I don't think it's so much just about brute forcing. It kind of hinges on what features are being exploited by the developer and whether or not the hardware target can support it. Like things can be scalable as long as it's like actually capable of those techniques. And we saw that a lot with the Switch quote unquote impossible ports. The Switch GPU is perfectly capable of what games in like Intech 6 and 7 were doing, right? They have those features, just much slower. But if you built your entire game around a specific feature or function like mesh shaders or something that doesn't really function on the last generation GPU, then the problem there isn't so much scalability as much as like, well, we need to find an alternative solution that actually would be workable on these platforms. I don't think the actual visual fidelity of Alan Wake 2 would be impossible to get looking pretty similar enough. It's just that the way they develop the game is kind of somewhat incompatible with how that system works. It's the same as like, on paper, the Switch is probably more capable than, say, like the Xbox 360, right? But it feels like they're kind of in a similar ballpark in terms of what they can deliver. It's just that the Switch has a more modern GPU that supports functions that the 360 simply cannot. But if the 360's GPU were more robust and those features had those more modern features, I think it would produce. I think you could see much more modern stuff running on that older system.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
I think it really just comes down to that kind of stuff more than anything else. So everything's scalable up to a point. And obviously, as you go back in time through consoles, the functionalities diverged more per platform. Like in the PS2 era, there's a lot of stuff on, like, say, Xbox that if you build around, say, pixel shaders, you could find a way to do something on PS2, but you largely had to come up with a completely different solution because the PS2 did not have programmable shaders at all, which is what we saw with stuff like, say, Reckless, the Yakuza missions, right? Which got a GameCube and PS2 port. On Xbox, it was a shader showcase. It was an amazing looking game, but it was 30 FPS. They ported the PS2 and GameCube, and it was 60 FPS, which was cool, but they drastically altered the visuals because those platforms could not do it. So that type of port, I think, of Alan Wake would actually be possible on the Switch, but it would require them to redevelop the way things were done to work in a completely different way. But given the increase in budgets and development times, I don't think it makes sense. It's prohibitively expensive to do that for a minimum return.
Yeah. Super minimal return at that point. Yeah.
Anything more to add to this? I mean, when he's talking about here, Kyvith says the argument is, what's he saying? I keep hearing the argument that the lengthy cross-gen period was justified because consoles just aren't that different from each other anymore. I think that's kind of half of it. The other half is simply the commercial necessity of having to support cross-gen to make the projects financially worthwhile.
Beyond that, go ahead.
So, and the other point is that they are similar in ways that we probably haven't seen in a prior console generation before, because it is fundamentally x86 CPU cores and Radeon GPUs. So there is that commonality there.
Also, game development cycles have become much longer, so a lot of games in this cross-gen period were in development before those machines were available, and they were not using any of the newest cutting-edge stuff. So it makes sense to scale them down because, well, they were already kind of targeting that level of hardware in the first place. Now, I feel like the product, in most cases, once a developer has released a product on, like, let me think about, like, Insomniac, right? Miles Morales was in development for both of those things. And then once they shipped that, when they started working on Spider-Man 2, I'd say that the PS5 was already out at that point. So it didn't necessarily make sense to target that older hardware. Whereas, previously they maybe Insomniac's not the best choice. Maybe Guerrilla Games, actually, with Horizon Forbidden West, where that game was in development for a long time and the PS4 was still viable during its development. And so I'm sure it was mostly in development for PS4 with an eye on the next generation, saying, like, well, when we get the PS5, whatever it is, we'll take advantage of it by adding features to it. Whereas I think if it had started development when the PS5 was already out, we may not have seen that. So
for sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't think there's anything more to say to add to that.
Nope.
So let's move on to the next question. This one from Max Vandermolen. Hi DF, exclamation point. Following up from last week, I was wondering whether we may see a future in which Xbox Game Pass, or Games Pass for Alex, could be a thing on PlayStation and Nintendo platforms in a world where Apple will get forced by the EU to allow other stores on their platform. It may set a precedent for future cases. This would potentially allow platform holders to sell games on rivaling platforms through their respective storefronts. Thoughts? I'm just going to quickly pop in on this one to begin with, but the direction of travel does seem to be that although Apple is resisting with all of its might to not allow competing storefronts onto its proprietary ecosystem, it does seem that it is going to happen sooner or later. And I do wonder whether the same thing will happen on console. And I do think at that point, Microsoft may well think, why not put Games Pass on PlayStation? It just kind of makes sense at that point. What I find quite interesting, though, is Tim Sweeney seems to be making a point that these platforms are only viable because they're sustained by the licensing fees, and that those fees are effectively passed on to the user in the form of cheaper hardware. But I'm struggling to see whether the EU may see that distinction. What do you think the future is there, John? Do you think that eventually all of these platforms will have to open up?
I think that Sony and Nintendo will fight tooth and nail to keep something like that off of their platforms. And I think that Microsoft, it would behoove them to get Game Pass on those platforms, because Game Pass is the most successful of the subscription services, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
And opening that up to a larger base, that's a lot of potential money to make there. And I would say this would not happen unless the legal stuff comes into play. If they are forced to, as we're seeing with these EU laws, and they decide they want to do it, there's a very real possibility they could make that happen, and Sony and Nintendo could not stop them. So I feel like that's the only way it would happen. I don't think that they would allow it to appear on their platforms freely without some sort of legal threat. Because it doesn't benefit them really, right?
But the champion of the free markets, Tim Sweeney, he doesn't seem to have an issue with the console model. But with that said, I'm pretty sure that they've got some carve-outs on their contracts, which mean they probably don't pay the 30% for Fortnite MTX that other people probably do need to pay. Do you have any thoughts on this one, Alex?
I'd like to see it happen eventually.
Sure, yeah.
It is a little funny that you can get like some sort of EA subscription or whatever on a console, or buy a battle pass from a large software. You can buy an ABK battle pass, right? Like, or something for like Warzone. Get the next Warzone. But you can't do it with Game Pass, which is just another subscription, and they could take their cut of the subscription. I mean,
there would be, if this were to happen, there would be a massive impact on console prices because they could no longer be subsidized to the same level, right? Or there'd have to be some sort of accord, at least, that would make the models financially viable. Because when a console launches and it's put out there at a mainstream price point, they're losing a lot of money, and they amortize that cost because you've got to subscribe to PlayStation Plus to get your cloud saves and your online play and your free games, of course. But that's all factored into the calculation of how much they're going to charge for the console, and that would be problematic to that model. If you can't put out your console at $399, $499, whatever, because you're not going to get the same return that you would because you're competing on the market there. That's going to be interesting, because how would you get an installed base to begin with if you're having to charge $100, $200 more?
I don't know. It works for PCs.
Yeah, that is. Some might say that is a different market, though, right?
Yeah,
and it is typically more expensive to get the same level of experience.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, I just think like it's also larger. So I don't know. I feel like it's possible. It would just be different. Just, I don't know. Maybe we do the Microsoft thing where one is once again very underpowered and one is a lot more powerful. You have a larger gap then in the market. You have a larger premium machine that is much more worth its price. That's higher up, and then a low end switchy kind of thing. That is actually rather underpowered. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually think that's probably going to be the replacement for the S/X model on the next generation. Rather than have the S model, you have the handheld. And
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, there was talk, wasn't there, John, of a licensing. It was a rumor of a licensing scenario where a chipset could be sold by Microsoft to people who wanted to make their own Xboxes.
There was some kind of rumor about that.
Yeah, which would be an interesting scenario if it were based on the handheld chipset.
It would be indeed.
Interesting stuff. I mean, there are big questions here about the future of exclusivity on a particular platform. I'm really interested to see how it plays out. But one way or another, it does seem that the momentum is going towards multi-platform, simply to expand the total addressable market and therefore justify these massive development costs that we seem to be seeing. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Mevlud Sabashvili. Sorry if I've pronounced that wrong again. Hi DF exclamation point. You have discussed possibility of handheld Xbox being Series S class device for next gen. What about hybrid device like Switch? Nintendo proved that concept works. Do you think in the Xbox ecosystem such a device could succeed? We seem to have naturally moved on to what we were just
That's
discussing.
interesting.
Exactly.
John, it does seem to be the case that one way or another, it's more than likely we're going to be seeing a handheld Xbox.
I think that's yeah. I've been talking about this for weeks now.
What do you think of the viability of a handheld replacing the Series S model?
I think
leaving the X model to be like the all singing, all dancing, high power console.
Oh, I think that's an amazing idea.
Do it.
I think that's absolutely the direction they should go. I think it wasn't necessarily time yet when the Series S launched, but things are improving on that front. I think it would make Xbox a lot more exciting. It would make certain things easier to swallow in terms of some of the decisions they made with the way the library stuff works. And it would also make it easier because there is still this like, oh man, you get the Series S and you have to scale the game down for that. At least for me personally, I'm a lot more forgiving of scaling stuff down when it's actually to play on a handheld, because that there are concessions that are required to hit that power budget to actually get it to work. And I think that would just make a really appealing device. And in fact, it would be so interesting that I could see a scenario where you'd want to maybe have both that handheld device and the upper end console in some places. Because I think most people are not going to buy a Series S and Series X unless they have multiple setups or something. But there's not really a use case where you would have both in one setup, right? But you could have a use case where you'd have a handheld Xbox and a higher end Xbox system.
Oh my gosh. Is this going to relive the PSP to PS2 to PS3 experience? Are we going to see you be able to watch on a rear view mirror what you're doing in Forza Horizon 6 on your Xbox Series Z handheld?
Series Z. Oh, dude, if they called it the Series Z, it would be like bringing back the arbiter of handhelds, the Smack Z.
Well, that's the issue, right? They've run out of letters.
That's true.
Gen.
Where do they go?
Beyond next gen.
They invent new letters.
They probably need better names.
Well, they could tap into like the German alphabet, get some umlauts in there. The Xbox.
Why not?
The Xbox.
The Greek alphabet.
Xbox
Omega.
Yeah, the Omega. Break out the Greek alphabet.
Yeah, the Xbox Omega. We claim this back from you, God of War. We've got the Omega symbol now.
Xbox Alpha. There we go.
Ooh,
are
Xbox Alpha.
Are you an Xbox Alpha male?
Yeah. That.
Oh no! Don't lead into that.
Let's not go there.
That could be a bit too on brand at that point. Sorry. Yeah.
I think there is much to commend this idea of the SX formula being tweaked to be handheld versus console, right? Simply awesome. Because there's actually, I guess you could say an interesting challenge of the current SX scenario is that ultimately they're being displayed on the same screen, and the S in many scenarios doesn't really compare.
No.
Meanwhile, if you have a handheld, just the Switch has proven this out, right? The smaller screen means that you can, in an exaggerated sense, get away with murder in terms of the compromises 100%. That you need to make.
Absolutely.
And it is less noticeable, right? And people understand the compromises a lot more. So yeah, I can see that this would be an interesting way forward there.
It's an interesting thing. It's kind of a little side tangent this week. I was experimenting with PS5 on my Pioneer Plasma downstairs, which is a 1080p plasma. And what prompted this was the whole Final Fantasy VII image quality debacle when it updated, and I realized, and I don't necessarily hate it, but it's weird. Where like, they basically decided to upscale the image with nearest neighbor now, or integer scaling. So it's like hard pixel edges. But we were curious, what would it look like on a 1080p native display? So we brought it down to the plasma, and it was so much better. I was actually floored by it. All of the visual issues were basically erased by this. It's essentially like pseudo downscaling, because the resolution is still often around 1080p, but it basically transformed it from this kind of blurry, overly TAA'd looking game with like where a lot of details lacking to looking more like an actual CG film. Like just the nature of plasma technology. and what it does with that resolution, it looked shockingly good. In a way that it's like,
So-
I'd almost rather play it on that plasma versus like a 4K OLED at this point.
Well, that's quite interesting, John, because I'm assuming that there isn't a bespoke 1080p mode
No,
on the on Final
There's
Fantasy.
not.
So what's happening there is that you've got your internal base resolution, whatever it is dynamic. Then it's getting that weirdo upscaling to
Oh my
4K,
gosh.
Yep.
and then it's being downscaled by the hardware back to 1080p.
Yep.
And you're saying that's good.
It looks awesome.
I guess it's
Like, so, and this is how I've also felt about, I use the Series S down there most of the time, and Series S games that look like blurry nonsense on the 4K screen end up looking actually great on that plasma. And it's
even the sub 1080 ones.
yeah, they actually they hold up pretty well. So it's basically like, this is like when we talk about using like CRTs for HD games, and it sort of improves the image quality by in certain ways. This is like the next level of that, where you're taking like 4K intended content and putting onto like a 1080p plasma specifically. So they have that unique sort of phosphor screen. So it ends up with a very different look. And plasmas, of course, still have extremely good motion resolution, like one step above, or it's one step down from the CRT, but it's much, much better than any like native LCD or even OLED screen in terms of like the lack of motion blur. It's very clear. So I was just so impressed by seeing that running on that thing that it reminded me of like, okay, there's still benefits to this technology. It's kind of a shame that you would need to play a new game like this on something like that to actually achieve good image quality, but I still found the results very fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. This does have the sound of hashtag content about it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about if I can look at a plasma TV. The problem with plasma, and I would discuss it in that, just comes down to it's a minefield. There are some really good plasma TVs, but there's a lot of bad plasma TVs that have some pretty serious issues. So it's not, CRT technology inherently is pretty good, even on low end sets, but with plasma, there was a wide range of quality, and older plasmas especially are pretty bad in many ways. So, but if you get a high end good if you find the right models of plasma, especially those last two generations of Pioneer, you get just this exceptional image quality.
Yeah, I had a Panasonic, which was pretty awesome.
Right,
But
exactly.
there is input lag issues compared to modern displays. I get your point.
That's the main.
They supported VGA too, right? Though,
some of them do.
A lot of these later plasmas.
Some of them do, not all of them,
they did.
but a lot of them do have actual VGA input. But like Rich says, there is some additional input latency there. It's not like unplayable or anything, but it's definitely not as responsive. So like a really precise, fast-paced game would suffer more on one of these displays.
Yeah, I think there's also perhaps some value in doing an investigation into, what is Series S actually like on a 1080p screen, a good 1080p screen that is an LCD, because maybe we are sort of overlooking the obvious here, which is that the reason Series S exists in some part is down to the fact that there's an awful lot of 1080p screens out there. And we know that the Series S can look good on on a CRT, but we've not really done an investigation into 1080.
One of those interesting things is I reviewed one of those portable OLED monitors. It's like a 15-inch widescreen 1080p monitor. The Series S looks stunning on that thing. So it's small enough that even sub 1080p games don't really show the image quality flaws. That becomes a really nice looking way. I mean, I think rendering resolution is completely independent from image quality at all. Not completely, but it hinges a lot on the display type used. 720p looks amazing on a good CRT. That's capable, like the FW900 720p is gorgeous, but if you just take a blurry bilinear upscaled 720p image on a 4K OLED, it's going to look absolutely atrocious. So there's so much. It's really important that you match the resolution with the display type, or at least get the scaling right for maximum quality. And if you don't do that, you're going to be left with a bad experience.
Makes you wonder what the heck they were doing with Final Fantasy. Like, what
baffled
went
by
through their
this.
minds when they said, yes, a nearest neighbor upscale on a game that has dynamic res makes most sense. I can't even.
Well, it presents similarly to
Yeah,
a
I think it
nearest
might be
neighbor.
the equivalent of like a sharp scale, where it's like a very subtle blurring to prevent uneven pixel scaling, but it does present
Right.
very much like, it looks interestingly like if you play a 320 by 240 DOS game on a VGA monitor, you get the big chunky pixels, right? Because it doesn't do 15 kilohertz. So it
True.
reminds me of that, but at a high with more pixels overall.
Yeah, well, whatever they're doing, it's a bad
It's
idea. That's not
weird.
how you get more sharpness out of an image. That's not how you get more sharpness out of
No.
an image. Whatever.
So the final question of the show, which is actually two questions, but they both seem to be covering the same subject matter. This one, first of all, from Daniel M. The announcement from Sony that the PS5 is entering the latter part of its life cycle came as a shock to many people, given that we've only really just started seeing a good amount of current gen exclusive games within the past year or so. And even then, many titles are still launching as cross-gen. Like the breakdown of exclusivity we've been seeing as of late, do you think we could also be seeing a breakdown of the traditional quote-unquote generation model, simply due to the fact that it's not viable for many games to release exclusively on newer machines with smaller install bases? This one from Dark_BT. Hello DF crew, in brackets, exclamation point. Do you think the PS4 Pro /1X may have watered down the generational leap into PS5 Series X? I'm still using my 1X, and there hasn't been one game yet this generation that has made me feel the need to spend $500 to upgrade to Series X or PS5. I think if I had a 1S or base PS4, though, an upgrade would be more appealing. Yeah, so this is something we've actually been talking about for a while now, and I was thinking about solidifying this within DF Direct to sort of get some commentary on this. I'm kind of inclined to agree with both of these guys that the mid-generation refresh, specifically the 1X especially, did water down the impact of the new generation because, ultimately in 2017, Microsoft produced the best console it possibly could. And then it had to do the same 3 years later. And the pace of technological innovation isn't as strong as it was in the past. So I do think it had an impact. And that's why we had those really interesting head-to-heads between Series S and 1X, where in some scenarios, I think, thinking Halo Infinite, there were specific advantages that 1X had that Series S hadn't. So
Yes.
Is it time, John, just to draw a line under all of this and say, right, the concept of a console generation doesn't seem to be working out anymore. Every 3 or 4 years, we're just going to produce a new console.
I'm kind of okay with that at this point, I feel.
Because you weren't back in the day.
No.
Back in 2020 when we were talking about, because Microsoft came clean essentially with their cross-gen plans.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one.
Do you want to have a think about it?
Yeah,
We'll go to Alex.
Go ahead.
I think I agree with the gentleman here, especially Rich saying Xbox One X, especially because I find like the PS4 Pro is kind of half baked in my humble opinion. I think it's not as good as of a machine as Xbox One X is. Not just because it has a better GPU, but just like the rest of the things that are being upped with Xbox One X made it much more of a larger leap over its base console because it touched memory, it touched the GPU, feature set,
Bandwidth.
the actual bandwidth. The bandwidth is a huge difference. And I feel like that is much more of a like the next best machine. It wasn't just like a slightly better PS4 like the PS4 Pro was kind of in a lot of ways. So I feel like that is the really good thing. And I think it did actually water down the transition. It made it a little bit less exciting. But
it's a tricky one, right? Because if you sort of factored out Xbox One X, you would have a leap from 1S to
Right.
Series S and Series X, which in both cases I think would have been highly compelling. But 1X was a really good console in 2017. And it did kind of muddy the waters there. But I agree with you about PS4 Pro, Alex, which is to say that it was underbaked. And there has been some conjecture from some people that it was actually originally designed to be a VR machine, which kind of makes sense. Double the GPU for double the viewports.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so the PS4 Pro wasn't as compelling, but probably sold more than the One X, ironically. So, but still, the leap from PS4 to PS5 would have been far more profound. Yeah.
The leap from...
Have you had time to think that?
Well, so when I look about why things played out the way they did, it probably is this confluence of factors. The PS4 Pro may have existed because of this VR push, and they just decided to put it into a standalone, that product. Xbox One X, I feel like almost had to exist to restore a certain level of faith in Xbox at the time, because the original Xbox One was kind of widely derided as not a great machine. And it was a misstep because Xbox was built on, we have the most powerful hardware of the available consoles. And even though PS3 tried to take that crown, it failed. The Xbox 360 was better hardware. I'm just going to say it. Xbox One was not a great machine. And this was like their chance to sort of try to come back and be like, look, we know. Here you go. This is much better for playing Xbox games. And I think it succeeded at that. And just because of that, it probably ultimately altered the way that they even think about consoles. And like, without that, we wouldn't be where we're at right now. So I mean, I do kind of enjoy that giant leap, but the way games are made these days, I feel like it's just not compatible with the old model anymore, with the traditional console model. I don't think it makes sense anymore.
It's an interesting point when you consider that if the strategy for Microsoft going forward is to have a handheld at one extreme and then, the most powerful console at the other extreme, inherently there has to be scalability. And I find it really hard to believe that a next generation handheld could do things that the current Series X can't do. So, you would there is still a strong argument to still support Series X with next gen.
Yeah.
if you've got a handheld that's,
but maybe not Series S at that point.
Yeah, that would kind of make sense. I think they would eventually phase out the Series X though, simply because of the cost implications. It's still going to be an expensive machine to make. Relatively, because as Sony told us last week, the cost of making these things isn't going down. But yeah, it's an interesting scenario. I'm still sort of intrigued to see how Microsoft plans to deliver this, because they are effectively promising another generational leap.
The biggest,
right?
The biggest, in fact. So yeah, but I'm kind of coming down. Well, I certainly think on the PlayStation side of things, it would probably make more sense to move to that iterative model, simply because the results seem to have been borne out by this generation.
Right.
Yeah. Anything more to add to that? I mean, are there any other competing models? I mean, we just
Switch,
aren't getting
where it's longer. 8 years, baby.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. The Switch is the competing model, and that's what Microsoft is looking to cover with a handheld Xbox, right? Seemingly.
Yeah. What I mean by that is like the gap of time. Like Nintendo, I mean, they've always done refreshes of their portables, but they really held on to the Switch as a platform for like a long time here. Longer than they've ever done in the past.
Is this the longest?
I think it is the longest.
360 is 2005. When in 2005?
More than the NES?
Wait, 2005?
NES is also a very long time.
No, I mean the Famicom NES was kind of replaced by like 1990 with Super Famicom, and right?
Yeah.
So it was like 6.
When did it come out?
It was 80. Was it 84? Mark,
why do I think 82?
Was the Famicom 84?
83.
83, right?
83.
Okay, there we go.
Also a long time.
He's like my new Siri here, or like Alexa. Instead of saying Alexa, to say Mark. But yes,
I don't know, it could go either way then. I guess we just, we'll know for sure once the new machines come along, right?
Right.
And there does seem to be an indication that it could be sooner rather than later, based on the recent reports. Just have to wait and see, right?
Yep.
But that's the end of the show.
Is it?
But before we round off,
yes, that's right. Go ahead, Rich.
we need to catch up on the Super Mario Stars.
Oh yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, Mark, where are you at right now in Mario 64?
I got 73 stars just for the heck of it, and I decided just not go beat the game.
Okay, so he got 73 stars and has now just finished the game. I believe the ending is happening behind us as we speak.
I can see it too.
Warning on this episode.
It's blur.
Well, the good news is depth of field blur is active.
Yeah, it's like a spoiler shield. But yeah, so since all right, so it took us it took him the same amount of time to basically beat Mario 64 as it did for us to record this show.
Incredible.
Literal amazing scenes.
Amazing scenes.
But that's it. That is the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed it. Ring the bell for whatever notifications may or may not come your way. I'm just trying to think what notifications I've had recently. It's all DF clips. Sorry, random gaming in HD.
I got some random gaming in
You
HD
did?
yesterday.
Any
Yeah,
good
I did.
stuff?
It was something about a Ryzen processor that isn't what it appears to be. I forget what it was.
Okay.
I'm just getting notifications from Kevin's English Room, which is an entertaining channel where it's like a half Japanese, half American guy and his buddies in Japan are like going through weird American culture things, like eating American food and talking about word stuff. It's fascinating.
Okay.
That's what's showing up in my thing.
Okay, yeah. So yes, DF Supporter Program. Join us. Become part of the show. Join our amazing community. Lots going on there. Early access opportunities. Occasional bonus material here and there. We need a new Versus video from you, John, at some point.
Oh yeah.
When time allows.
That's true. We absolutely do need one of those. I agree. I was thinking about doing one as soon as possible. I have some ideas. I think it'll be fun. Well, sort of. It'll be fun to torture me, but...
So yeah, supports program really important to us, and store.digitalfoundry.net for that wondrous portal to our merchandising wares. But that's all from us for this week. We'll see you next week.